Welcome to Texas Rye Whiskey Studies and Stab the Dragon Productions for a National Rye Whiskey Tournament, episode number 1. Today is July 14th, 2025, and this tournament is designed to cover a wide variety of rye whiskeys to see if I can choose some few favorites, perhaps. This tournament will have 2 divisions with a total of around 30 whiskeys, I think. The lower proof division is the 80 to 90 proof range, and then the higher proof is above 90. My method will be to do a review of each whiskey in groups of 2, and then do a one-on-one competition between those 2 whiskeys to see which one I prefer. Then go to the next pair. My reviews are fairly detailed, taking about 20 minutes each. The one-on-one matches will be conducted blind and rely primarily on taste, mouthfeel, burn, and finish to see which one of the 2 whiskeys I would drink 3 out of 5 nights in a row if offered both whiskeys. Tonight's rye whiskey to get the tournament underway is Basil Hayden's Dark Rye. Just the facts. Somewhat deceptively labeled, the dark rye is not technically a straight rye and does not meet the legal definitions for a straight rye whiskey. On the bottle it says Kentucky straight rye whiskey blended with Canadian rye and port. This whiskey is 80 proof, coming from the James B. Beam Distillery in Kentucky, and cost about $40 here in Fort Worth. This is considered a blended whiskey. Tasting notes. The website says complex blend of caramel, dried fruit and oak with back notes of spice, sweetness, and rye spice. I get those dark fruits like plums, raisins, dates, with some hints of chocolate and leather, maybe even tobacco and molasses. This is an amazingly delicious whiskey. My score for this whiskey was a 93. Letter grade for drinkability, A+. My recommendation. This whiskey is a blended whiskey, so it's not legally a rye, but it does line up right beside that legal category. This whiskey is genius level and will be one of my favorites that I'll have to keep on hand. I give it my highest recommendation, which is unique in that it is as good as some of my beloved Texas ryes. If you're a wine person but want to get into whiskey, start here. If you love rye whiskeys, you should try this one. If you just don't like the harshness of whiskey and are afraid of the burn, try this like dessert in a bottle. Now for the details. First, history. Meredith Basil Hayden Sr. was a rye farmer credited with introducing a high rye mash bill into his bourbon in the late 1700s in Kentucky. He founded Bardstown, Kentucky in 1785. Jacob Beam began selling his bourbon, Jake Beam Sour Mash, in Kentucky in 1795. And in 1820, he passed the torch to his son, David Beam, who started using column stills and changed the name to Old Tub. In 1920, Prohibition ended the Beam production for 13 years, but with the repeal of Prohibition, James B. Beam came back, and in 1935 began selling bourbon again with a new name, Colonel James B. Beam Bourbon, which was shortened to Jim Beam Bourbon in the 1940s. Basil Hayden Bourbon is one of the 4 core small batch brands created by the Jim Beam Company. In 1992, Booker Noe started this, and the dark rye didn't come out until 2017. For history, 5 out of 5 points. Bottle, label, and marketing. This is a nice looking bottle, fairly traditional, pretty plain. The label, however, is very attractive and eye-catching. It has light and dark brown with some gold lettering and this metal strip going around here in the middle. It's got a belt buckle with BH on it. The explanation of what's in the bottle is on the label in 2 places around the neck here and then down in here as well. This dark rye is released in 2017, but it's still going strong. It's marketed towards folks who may not like a high proof whiskey or the heavy rye notes that a lot of ryes have. This is sweet, fruity, and dessert-like. This whiskey is genius level. 5 out of 5 points for bottle, label, and marketing. The appearance of this whiskey, you can see in the bottle how dark that is. That is every bit as dark as some of my beloved Texas whiskeys. You may not be able to tell, but there's a red tinge to it coming from the port wine. Here it is in the glass. And again, that's really dark. The port wine is involved here, making it dark, kind of a dark red brown color. So this is a strong 4 out of 5. Composition. This blended whiskey uses Jim Beam produced straight rye. And which of the varieties of the Jim Beam product, I don't know if it's Jim Beam or if it's Knob Creek or if it's just a recipe from Basil Hayden alone. I'm not sure. But then they also use some Alberta rye to blend that Canadian flavor in there. And a California port wine is somewhere along the line added into the mix. And so that makes this a blended whiskey. Coming in at 80 proof, and while there's no age statement, Canadian whiskeys must be at least 3 years old. And on here it says, blend with Kentucky straight rye, so that's 2 years old at least. So it's great age statement, but it doesn't really count because once you blend them, then you don't have a straight rye. So Basil Hayden may have their own recipe here, but for composition, 13 out of 15. The nose. It does have an inviting nose. Sweet, dark fruits like plums, raisins, dates. Hints of wine and a little bit of spice from the rye. Maybe some things like leather, tobacco, wood. So this is really a rarely rich nose for me because my nose is inadequate. I very often can't smell whiskeys at all. This is a 9 out of 10. Taste. Wow. The palate is true to the nose. This is dark, rich, fruity, sweet, but in a dark way like molasses. Mildly spicy, but this is not like any other rye I've ever had. Well, I say that. The closest ryes I can relate this to would be Balcones Texas rye or Tabacero malted rye here in Texas. It's very much like that. There's another rye coming up in a couple of months. Three Rangers rye. I think it's going to be close to that. This is just dessert in a glass. Again, there's hints of chocolate and leather, tobacco. When you blend with the Canadian rye, this whiskey reminds me a lot of ways. I did a review recently of Devil's Brigade whiskey coming out of Montana, Willie's Distillery in Montana. Devil's Brigade is 40% Canadian whiskey and 60% American bourbon, Montana bourbon. And this kind of resembles that whiskey as well. So the richness of the Canadian whiskey is present here with this Kentucky straight rye it's blended with, but the heavy emphasis of the port wine is felt with that fruit and the sweetness. Yeah. So 23 out of 25 points on taste. Mouthfeel, burn, and finish. For an 80 proof, the mouthfeel here is not thin. I mean, it's not real rich, but to me, it's not thin. there's just a faint mouth tingle and in the back of the throat. No real burn. So it's incredibly smooth for those who don't like a strong burn. It doesn't go up in my sinuses, doesn't give you a chest hug. The finish is medium to long with those fruit and molasses tastes lingering. Again, this is dessert in a glass. I could only wish for a higher proof of like 84 to 86, and that would make this perfect. But otherwise, for mouthfeel, burn, and finish, 13 out of 15 points. Now, neat or mixer. This is amazing neat. I probably wouldn't even put ice on this. I just don't add ice to my whiskeys. And I don't think I would mix it with any cocktail, although I'm sure if you go to the website, they're going to tell you some cocktails to do. But, I mean, maybe something with chocolate. I don't know. I mean, maybe an old-fashioned using maple syrup instead of simple syrup. Something like that might work. But really, I don't see a need to mix this at all. I mean, this is perfect the way it is. At $40 for a bottle, you could mix it without, it feeling like you're just pouring money down. But now the flavors here are so rich, warm, and wonderful. I don't see the point of mixing it. 5 points out of 5. Price, value, and availability. Total Wine had it for $39.99. Goody Goody $39.99, and Specs $42.07. I think this is a righteous price with great value and availability for this quality product. And again, if this was 86 proof, man, I'd gladly pay $50 for it. This is top tier in my collection. Price, value, and availability, 10 out of 10 for sure. Bonus points. This is simply amazing. 5 out of 5 for bonus. And this gives me a total score of 93. My letter grade for drinkability, solid A+. My analysis and recommendation. This whiskey is a specialty whiskey, boutique whiskey maybe. It's not legally a rye. I think legally it's called a blended whiskey. But it lines up right alongside the rye category because it's all rye, except that added port wine. And to me, this whiskey is genius level. It's just going to be one of my favorites that I will keep on hand. I give it my highest recommendation, which is unique in that, this is as good as some of my beloved Texas ryes. Now, if you're a wine person and you want to get into whiskey, start here for sure. This would be a great, a lot of times finished whiskeys are a good transition for people who are wine lovers. This is one step beyond that. This is not a finished rye whiskey. It's not, I've had some ryes that were finished in wine casks before or rum casks, and they're awesome. But this one actually has port wine in it. Okay, and that the Canadians do that. They'll add stuff. The law in Canada, you can allow about 9% of something else in your whiskey, and it's still legal in Canada. So that I'm sure that's what they did here. But if you love rye whiskeys, you should try this one. Now, if you just don't like the harshness of whiskey and you're afraid of the burn, try this because it is a smooth dessert in a bottle. As a dessert whiskey, though, I would not want to drink it with more than, I would not want to have more than one glass of this in an evening. It's just really too rich. Now, I'm going to do a sibling sample, right? So I'm going to look at Basil Hayden Kentucky Straight Bourbon real quick. So here's the siblings together. Right there. So notice the dark rye has a darker label. There's that. All right. So I've got a glass of the Basil Hayden bourbon here, and it also is 80 proof. So I'm wondering if there is any type of a relationship I can taste here. The nose, this is a very bourbony, sweet nose, a little bit of corn. Oh, that's actually a good nose. Again, I'm smelling, it smells like Play-Doh. That's wild. Sweet Play-Doh. Here we go. That is a very good bourbon. I see why it's so popular. Can I tell a relationship between the two? Not sure that I can. I mean, I guess vaguely there's some similarities there. So, yeah, maybe so. Maybe there is a little bit of a relationship between the two. So, all right. My conclusion. This is the first whiskey in my National Rye Whiskey Tournament, and I placed it first because it is 80 proof, but this one may win the prize. I mean, this is just beyond good. So, next up will be its cousin, Jim Beam Rye, 80 proof. So that will be coming up next. For now, this is Stab the Dragon Productions and Texas Rye Whiskey Studies, out here.